In a Violent Nature's ending is relatively straightforward, but highlights a purposefully and haunting ambiguity that benefits the film. Directed by Chris Nash with a naturalistic approach that subverts the typical slasher, In a Violent Nature follows an undead masked killer dubbed Johnny. After his resting place is disturbed by a group of teenagers, Johnny rises from the grave and hunts the group, picking them off one by one while searching for a locket. By the end of the film, the modern slasher villain Johnny has slaughtered all but one of the teens, setting up a quietly ambiguous and haunting third act. Although the plot of In a Violent Nature is fairly basic, the ending of the film poses questions about the natural urge for gruesome impulses and the way it can spur some to lash out in horrifying ways. The ending of the In a Violent Nature embraces the slasher movie tropes that clearly inspired the film, while also reflecting on the natural instinct for violence, all while leaving the door open for a potential follow-up that could bring Johnny back for another rampage. Here's how the ending of In a Violent Nature reflects on common themes of slasher subgenre as a whole. Is Johnny still free after In a Violent Nature's ending? Johnny isn't actually defeated by the end of In a Violent Nature. The killer from In a Violent Nature. In a Violent Nature's ending leaves Johnny's ultimate fate somewhat ambiguous, leaving the possibility that Johnny is still free. Much of the film focuses on Johnny as he hunts down the locket that once belonged to his mother. Eventually revealed to be the one thing capable of keeping his spirit at rest, much of In a Violent Nature's cast are gruesomely dispatched before they even realize what they've done and how important the locket is. After watching the last of her friends try, and fail, to distract Johnny as part of a plan to lure him back to his grave. Watching this, Chris leaves the locket behind and makes a run for it. The final shot of the film implies Johnny reclaimed the locket, but there's no indication what happened to him afterwards. There's a chance that Johnny simply returned to his grave with the locket and went back to sleep, bringing peace back to the forest for a time. There's also a chance that the failure to properly put him down means he's still roaming the woods. While he may not be on an active hunt, this leaves the possibility that his titular violent nature could set back in, setting Johnny up on another rampage. Why Johnny lets the final girl live? Chris is the only character to escape Johnny's rampage. In a Violent Nature IFC Shutter 6. Chris is the final girl of In a Violent Nature. A common trope in the kind of horror slasher films that directly inspired In a Violent Nature, the final girl trope often refers to the last survivor in many horror films. Chris continues that trend, escaping into the woods after leaving Johnny's locket behind. Her survival suggests that Johnny truly was driven solely by the drive to relocate the locket, as he doesn't appear again after that point in the film. While Johnny had already proven his lethal bona fides, his decision to let Chris escape suggests his rampage was specifically tied to the locket. The decision to spare Chris and not chase after her implies that Johnny will be content now that he has his locket again, and may even willingly return to his grave. Thematically, Chris' survival reinforces the connections In a Violent Nature has to the horror films that inspired it, adhering to the kind of rules most often seen in the slasher subgenre. Those films also often had a final girl, like Chris, and her desperate escape from an undefeated killer feels specifically reminiscent of the ending of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.